In my presentation, I will first talk about obesity and vitamin D status and the prevalence of vitamin D deficiency in obese population. Here I will concentrate on our own experience and on our clinical studies that we performed. Then I will talk about obesity and cancer risk. Here I will present you a meta-analysis of observational studies. And vitamin D status and cancer. Here will be also the meta-analysis, two big meta-analysis about breast and colorectal cancer, and a prospective study by Giovannucci. And then I will present you our calculations regarding the risk that is associated both with vitamin D deficiency and obesity. Yes, the world is getting heavier and heavier each and single day. Nowadays, in some countries, we can actually, the prevalence of vitamin D of obesity and overweight is so high that it's reaching 70 and 60%. For example, you can see that in Saudi Arabia, there is 30% of persons who are obese and over 30 who are overweight. And as it has been calculated by World Health Organization, by 2015 there will be 2.3 billion persons all over the world that would have excess body weight, which we define as BMI over 25, and 700 million will be obese, that we also define as BMI, obesity we define as a BMI over 30. We also define our morbid obesity or severe obesity with a BMI over 40. Well, situation in Norway is not that bad. Possibly it's because of the lifestyle, because Norwegians love to go out to enjoy the sun first of all, and then to go to the forest and jog a lot and do some sport activities. So as you can see that most of the population, Norwegian population, will be normal weight, and only about 10% will be obese. This trend has changed slightly over the last 20 years, and the prevalence of obesity has increased in some regions of Norway from 10 to 20, and some regions to 25%. And you can also see that we are suffering from childhood obesity, because this is the children are also growing. And during the last 30 years, an average Norwegian became 5 to 6 kilos heavier, and the average BMI has increased by 2. Although the prevalence of obesity is very low in Norway, we still managed to find some obese people there. And we have used the data provided for us by Dr. Fedon Lindberg. He is a medical doctor who is treating obesity. Actually, he is treating all the possible disorders related to weight, from anorexia to bulimia. And he has private clinics. So what we did, we've gotten a database that included all the cases that was registered in his clinics between 2001 and 2007. Those were the patients who had their vitamin D levels routinely analyzed with no suspicion for vitamin D deficiency or anything, and those who were seeking for the medical attention to normalize their weight. I mean the normalized weight, because there were some of patients who were actually underweight. So they needed an advice regarding the physical activity and diet to increase their weight. Such a way we were extremely lucky to get a very broad spectrum of BMI. So the BMI was from 18.6 to almost 60. And you can also notice that vitamin D levels or calcidiol levels were not so bad, even though the population was obese. There was about 67% of the total population obese. We also don't have, unfortunately, we don't have any records regarding vitamin D intake or vitamin D supplementation. But also back from the history, we know that the recommended vitamin D intake, the daily intake in Norway before 2004, it was 200 international units. And after 2004, it was 300 international units. But actually, the pills that are available, they are available only in 400 units. It's funny, but that's how our system is working. So we can assume that the vitamin D intake was, on average, it was about between 5 and 6 micrograms. What we saw when we have analyzed our data, we saw that normal weight persons have good vitamin D levels, and on average they were about 18 nanomoles. And that women in all categories, in all BMI categories, they have slightly higher vitamin D levels than men. Severely obese patients, they had, of course, the lowest vitamin D levels. What is interesting here is that the persons with underweight, or those who were below 20, they were only women, they also had lower vitamin D levels than normal weight population. And that was a significant data. So what we also concluded that women have a better vitamin D status. Overweight is the risk, underweight, both underweight and overweight are the risk factors for the vitamin D deficiency possible. And that vitamin D or calcidiol levels would also increase with age. That is, it's not presented on that slide, but it's possible due to increased vitamin D intake, because all the people, they are more aware of osteoporosis and other health outcomes, so they actually eat more fish and they more often take supplementations. The prevalence of vitamin D deficiency, as we may expect, was also the highest in the severely obese persons. And you can see that the prevalence was higher in men than in women. And patients with BMI over 40, most of them, or more than 40% of them, they would be deficient, vitamin D deficient. Surprisingly enough, we have no men in the category below 25 who have vitamin D deficiency. So this is an indication that the normal weight is actually, it's a very good predictive factor for the vitamin D levels, especially in men. Generally, we had about 70 and 60% of men and women with calcidiol levels below 75. So most of the population was still insufficient. Again, surprisingly, every fifth man and every third woman with normal BMI would have the levels above 100. So it's not so rare to have such a good vitamin D status. And the third outcome is that we also observed the seasonal variation, and the vitamin D, the prevalence of vitamin D deficiency was, as we would expect, much higher during the winter time to compare with the summertime. So, for example, it would be about 75% of men with a BMI over 40 would be deficient, would have the levels below 50. And almost everybody in this category would be insufficient during the winter time. We have also analyzed the vitamin D status in obese and overweight children. Here we define overweight and obese with the percentiles. So children and adolescents that would have the BMI above 85 of the percentile, they would be considered as overweight, and about 95 as obese. We also observed here that about 50%, so a half of children with obese and overweight would have vitamin D insufficiency, and only 20% of them would be deficient. But what is interesting here is that preteens, they would have extremely low prevalence of vitamin D deficiency. And that's probably because of Norwegian tradition to give to children cod liver oil. And it's given like with spoon, and it's like pulled with a bottle as it's shown, and children, they have no problems in taking vitamin D this way. Teenagers have much higher prevalence of vitamin D deficiency as well as insufficiency. That's possibly due to several factors. First of all, that they don't want to listen to their parents anymore, so they don't want to do anything what is healthy. So they don't take any supplementation, and they don't take any cod liver oil. And their intake of vitamin D is actually the lowest in this category. And the second thing is that they are very rare out in the sun. On average, every teenager will spend about 4 hours, from 4 to 6 hours in front of their computers every day. So while children are playing more outside. So yes, to sum up, we will just compare two persons. One is normal weight person and another one is obese. And we will then we will decide who is the biggest loser there actually. So the one who is obese, he would have morbidly obese, he would have a BMI at 45, would have most probably the vitamin D levels, according to our data again, about 50 nanomoles. The normal weight would have 75 nanomoles. Obese would have 33% chance to be vitamin D deficient, while normal weight, according to our data, would have close to 0 chances to get vitamin D deficiency. Obese would have, most of them would be insufficient, while only 40% of normal weight men would have vitamin D levels below 75 nanomoles. Again in Norway. What are possible physiological risk factors for vitamin D deficiency or low vitamin D levels in obese? First of all, it's a sequestration in fat tissue, because once vitamin D got into their lipocyte, it will get stored there, it will get esterized, and their vitamin D bioavailability will be decreased. And the second thing is a volume distribution effect. As it has been calculated on the animal model, about 35% of total vitamin D will be stored in the fat, in a normal weight person with a weight about 70 kilos. And if person has much more fat, of course, that would be stored mainly in the fat tissue, because it's a fat-soluble vitamin. So that's why the serum levels would be lower in obese persons. There was also a couple of studies that measured vitamin D levels in in fat tissue and in serum, and they actually showed that there was a positive correlation between those two levels. Among other risk factors could be, first of all, is inadequate vitamin D intake, and this we have seen many times, and there was an amazing study performed in North Norway on large sample of patients that showed that obese patients obese persons have much lower vitamin D intake, because simply they don't prefer to eat fish, and fish meal is very popular in Norway. And the other thing is, of course, it's sun exposure habits, because they would like to cover larger areas of the body when they are going out in the sun. They are less in the sun and they have less physical activity that prevent also from vitamin D obesity or deficiency. And they would also benefit 60% less from the same UV exposure than the normal weight person, just because that vitamin D that would be produced would be back stored in the fat. Then we were very interested, how the obesity actually correlates with cancer. And we saw a beautiful meta-analysis recently published that shown that obese person, or the increase of BMI by 5, would increase the total cancer risk by 18%. We have chosen two types of cancer to look particularly in men and two types in women. So we looked for colorectal cancer for men, and as you can see that the 5 BMI increase would increase risk of colon cancer by 24%, and rectal cancer by 9% in men. And in women we looked for postmenopausal breast cancer. Again, 5 BMI increase would result in 12% increase in the risk of breast cancer, and colon cancer that would have slightly less increase in risk. Obesity have different mechanisms to impact cancer risk. And first of all, and the main one is the development of chronic insulin resistance. Other mechanisms that could be involved in also it's altered levels of adipokines, vitamin D induced inflammations, and also altered sex hormone levels. It's quite complicated scheme, but it also shows that actually obesity and dysfunction of adipose tissue may result in cancer cell proliferation, higher survival, invasion and metastasis, and production of angiogenesis. Our next idea was, could actually the decrease in vitamin D levels as a consequence of obesity have a role for the cancer risk? And we made some basic calculations just to assume that. So first of all, what we did, we took the vitamin D levels in our population, and we saw that per each 5 BMI increase, every woman would decrease the vitamin D levels by 4.5 nanomole. Men would decrease by slightly more, by 5.5 nanomole. So on total, it's about 1 BMI increase per 1 nanomole decrease in calcidiol levels. This is in agreement with the recently published studies that also shown that the increase of BMI by 1 would result it's from 0.7 to 0.3 decrease of calcidiol levels. Further, we used their calculations, we based our calculations on Giovannucci study. This is a prospective study that showed that the increment of vitamin D levels by 25 nanomoles would result in 70% decrease of cancer risk, of total cancer risk. Or if we switch it other way around, it would be about 20% of increased risk per 25 nanomole decrease. For our calculations, we also used other studies. There were 2 big meta-analyses published based on the prospective studies published recently. And then it's 20% reduction that found 20% reduction for the breast cancer risk with 25 nanomole increase. And for colorectal was pretty much the same as found before, so it was 18%. Thus, based on our calculations, we found that with of course an assumption that all the trends here are linear, which are never, because we found that a person with a BMI of 45 would have almost double high risk of getting cancer than a normal weight person, and it's about 20% of that increase would be most probably due to vitamin D decrease. We analyzed it for breast cancer. For breast cancer, we found slightly higher increase or slightly higher effect of vitamin D. And it's about 40% of total cancer risk that can be explained by vitamin D levels. Here is a colorectal cancer, and it's a very big difference between women and men. So for women, it would be almost 75%, or something like that. Decrease or response of vitamin D would be responsible for 75% of increase of risk with BMI. And in men, it would be only 26%. So this difference can be actually explained by the difference in incidence in those 2 categories. So you can see that actually only the increase would be, the risk for those who are obese would be only 20% higher in general for women, while in men, that would be 60% higher. So those who are obese would have 60% higher risk for colorectal cancer. So probably that's why we see this difference. And also that postmenopausal women use hormone replacement therapy. And that was shown also to decrease the risk of colorectal cancer. Yes. So there are many other mechanisms that can have an impact here, but we don't know about them yet because that's just hypothesis, and we are working on performing a clinical trial. To sum up, we say that the normal weight person would have, that has the vitamin D levels of 75, would have a 50% lower risk of getting cancer than the obese person. If we are talking only about like obesity itself without thinking about vitamin D levels. So if there is an obese person with vitamin D deficiency, then the risk would be 1.65. If there is only a obese person with a good vitamin D levels, then possibly the risk would be about 50%. For women, it's slightly bigger advantage of vitamin D. So the obese woman would have about 1.4 risk for getting breast cancer, postmenopausal breast cancer, while the obese woman with normal vitamin D levels would most probably have it like 24%. So yes, what is their conclusion of the Biggest Loser? I think she was very happy because she decreased the weight and then she got finally her vitamin D levels above 100. So who is the winner here? Yeah, we are the winner, the Biggest Losers. Thank you very much.
Probably the biggest factor for breast cancer for obese women is the fact that they've got higher levels of endogenous estrogens. And
yeah.
Is there an interaction between those endogenous levels of estrogens and vitamin D levels?
There were definitely some studies published on that, but I'm not aware of them because we were not particularly looking in the sex hormones disturbances and risk of cancer. But I'm pretty sure there would be some correlation between, because they are both steroid hormones, so they correlate. And vitamin D also control some kind of controlling the expression of estrogen receptors. And other way around also.
Congratulations to your nice talk and nice data. Maybe a provocative question. Do you think if vitamin D itself can be protective against obesity?
Yes, that's a very good question. Thank you very much. It's not only you who was asking that question. There were a couple of other researchers before. And there were, at least that I know, there were two recently published studies. First from Germany by Professor Sitterman, who was investigating the vitamin D intake of over 3,000 over, I think, half a year, and he found no effects on the weight. So their patients, they haven't lost any weight. And another much bigger study was performed in Norway, in Tromsø, and there were the vitamin D supplementation was administered for a year. And it was as high as 20 to 40,000 international units per week, and there was no effect as well. But what they found, that the vitamin D intake in obese persons is very beneficial in regard for cardiovascular markers and in regard to depression.
Can I add a comment to that, if I may?
Yeah.
Dr. Hollick, in his latest book, has devoted a couple of pages to this subject of how to help a very obese person to reduce. And he thinks that vitamin D can play a part. It has effect on the leptin, which affects the hunger. And then he's proposing specific forms of exercise to try and help the person reduce their weight. So in his latest book, have a look at that one. Just a second.
Obesity itself promotes inflammation. Yeah. You Norwegians eat a lot of salmon and herring, and probably those with a higher vitamin D are also getting raised omega-3, which is a very profound anti-inflammatory factor. So my question really is, although we may see that vitamin D associated with obesity status, it's possible that those with high vitamin D have high omega-3, which reduces inflammation. So it's just teasing out that obesity, inflammation, vitamin D, omega-3.
Yeah, but we were actually looking for what is the diet content of obese persons, and they actually eat very little fish. So they prefer hamburgers, they prefer fries, and so they don't eat fish. And if an average Norwegian would have the fish meal, most probably with salmon, about 2 times a week, the obese person would have it about once every 2nd week. So they actually have a reduced intake of fish, as well as an omega-3 fat.
Which may be a confounding factor that needs to be thought about in
Yeah,
dietary studies.
Just on the obesity issue, the whole issue about omega-3 and omega-6 is the relative amount of each. So it's quite common to get very obese patients taking a very small fish oil supplement and expecting to get an anti-inflammatory picture, which isn't going to happen really. It's all relative amounts in terms of pro-inflammatory cytokines. But I really did like your talk very much. I think one of the other issues, which you didn't, obviously weren't addressing in this, but the issue about leptin is if only people ate because they were hungry, we wouldn't have to worry about obesity. No, and perhaps vitamin D would be more of an issue. When we see people that are morbidly obese, which have the high risk, these are people that have lost the cues for hunger, and that something is eating them, that's why they're eating. So just to control leptin levels of vitamin D is not going to reduce obesity without attacking behavioural issues as well. Lovely talk.
But also, of course, vitamin D deficiency in SAD equals comfort eating. And that could be another factor in the obesity issue.
That was a very good talk, thank you. As far as the dietary issue goes, do you think there's any link between the reduction of nutritive status in food, mass-produced food, factory-produced food over the last 60 years since the Second World War, and or is that an accepted fact that people are now effectively malnourished? Because the British government has taken measures every year of the content of such good things as minerals and other nutrients in food, and it's been steadily going down. Is this important, do you think?
Yeah, that's, yeah. Well, since that's just only the hypothesis, of course we haven't included all the possible factors into that. Norwegian food is basically, we try to eat, although I'm not original Norwegian, we try to eat as healthy as possible. So people prefer, of course, fish, prefer their raw foods to be cooked, but of course the quality of the food, it's a big question. What actually they buy in the shops, like all this half-made food that most of the obese person would eat, actually. That's of course a big question. It's a big question.